Good afternoon and welcome back to our fifth in a series of Hurricane Harvey funder briefings. I'm Kim Maphis Early with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, and the Simmons Foundation is our sponsor in these briefings for the community of funders concerned to respond to the Hurricane Harvey recovery. I'm going to start today with a few recovery updates on Hurricane Harvey recovery efforts, and then we'll hear from Philanthropy Southwest about what they're hearing from their members, what they're seeing on site visits, and how they are attempting to support their members. Also, during today's briefing, we'll have opportunities for funders to share information about their work and ask questions of each other. As a reminder, before we get started with our presentation, this webinar is being recorded, and it, along with a written summary, will be archived at the Simmons Foundation webpage in their initiative area on Hurricane Harvey. You'll also find all the other briefings that we've hosted there, both a written summary and a recording, and some of the research slides that our presenters have shared. We're very interested to hear from you. That's why we're doing these briefings. And you can submit a question to our speakers or to your fellow funders at any time using the question and answer box on the top of your screen. Simply type your question and hit send. One of our primary goals for these briefings is to provide a platform for funders to share information about your grant making or to ask questions of other funders, with the goal of increasing your knowledge of philanthropic responses to Harvey and opening opportunities for working together to alleviate the suffering of those impacted by the hurricane. If you're interested to share the recovery work of your foundation, click on the icon to raise your hand, and when that time in our briefing comes, I'll share the microphone with you. I'll announce your name and turn your mic on. Wait just a second for the sound to kick in, then give your name and the name of your philanthropic organization. Today we'll start with some news updates about Texas recovery funding. As a reminder, our summary report will have active links to any resources that are mentioned, and we supply this information to aid in your strategic planning for investments in recovery. All the economic development reps in the region are meeting today in Beaumont to plan for community development block grants for disaster recovery. Watch for news of that meeting as we check back in with our FEMA reps. Last week, we announced the dates for the Recovery Symposia. We have since learned that the first two have been postponed and will be rescheduled, and we'll update that information as we get it. And then finally, tomorrow, there is an important event called Building a More Resilient Housing System by the Kinder Institute for urban research, local and national experts. We'll discuss the resilient strategies and how those strategies can shape the affordable housing system. This half-day event explores municipalities' responses to acute disasters like Hurricane Harvey and approaches to long-term resilience planning. This free event in Houston is sponsored by J.P. Morgan and Chase, and that it's tomorrow, so Tuesday, March 27th. Look back to our report on this webinar to find a link, an active link that you can click for more information. If our FEMA reps are on, I want to invite them to share in any updates that they may have. Okay, we'll move ahead then with our presentation. I want to introduce you to Lucille DiDomenico, the Executive Director, and Lauren Haskins, the Director of Communications for Philanthropy Southwest. A native New Yorker, DiDomenico came to Texas to work for the Diocese of Brownsville, And prior to joining Philanthropy Southwest, she served as Executive Director of Health is Possible Incorporated, as President and CEO of the Houston chapter of the American Institute of Banking, as Division Director for Republic Bank Houston, and as Program Director of a United Way agency in Houston. Haskins has worked in marketing and communications for both nonprofits and for-profit organizations, and prior to joining the team at Philanthropy Southwest, she served as New Friends, New Life, an anti-human trafficking organization in Dallas, and was Vice President of Account Services at an integrated marketing and communications firm. Philanthropy Southwest members include trustees and staff with foundations in Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. The organization offers conferences, educational resources, publications, and other member services. We've asked Lucille and Lauren to talk about the disaster recovery work of their members in a region that is impacted by low attention disasters such as floods and frequent earthquakes, and also bigger disasters such as tornadoes, wildfires, and hurricanes. We're eager to hear from them, and we welcome you.
And the Simmons Foundation, a PSW member, Philanthropy Southwest member, for sponsoring and supporting these webinars. In particular, I want to make mention of the most recent blog on the CDP website that Sally Ray wrote, and it also includes some photographs. It was really excellent on her recent visit to Houston's outlying areas still affected deeply by the hurricane and ongoing recovery efforts. So thank you. I also want to thank Greater Houston Community Foundation CEO Steve Maisland for his participation in your last webinar, for his update on giving, which of course I won't repeat. You've got all that data in your records and in your tapes. And since this is a webinar that hopefully will reach funders and individuals from across the nation, I want to thank all of you for your support to date, and to the volunteers from all over the country who continue to come to the affected areas. Not only have the volunteers on the ground accomplished amazing work, but your presence has been uplifting and inspiring to those affected and all those who reside in these areas. I thought that I would focus on two of the affected areas that are located southwest of Houston. One of the requests of our members early on was that we provide information on relief and recovery efforts, and not just from just our members, but from all over the regional association world, those who run organizations like Philanthropy Southwest. Where are those rural areas that are severely affected that would not necessarily be receiving any money from the Houston-Harris County area? And so I made a visit several months ago, and also want to give you some information on what those two counties, Fort Bend County and Wharton County, are like. So to begin, I will talk to you about Fort Bend County, which is the fastest, largest growing county in the United States, and has recently been called the most diverse county in the United States. In fact, Stephen Kleinberg of the Kinder Institute at Rice University has called it the fastest growing area in the world. It boasts a population of about 742,000 people. There are 3 cities that are located in Fort Bend. I mean, not just 3 cities, but cities that are growing quickly. One of them is Katy, which is partly located in Fort Bend County. And its top industries have included food manufacturing, energy, engineering, education, healthcare, and technology. It has excellent school districts. Its proximity to Greater Houston and ease of mobility is considered a real plus. And so the population and employment opportunities in Fort Bend have all contributed to the growing population. So As of January, Fort Bend County had FEMA registrations totaling more than 58,000. FEMA also reported 118 million in verifiable losses and 48 million in unmet needs. More than 7,000 homes were damaged. As we alluded to briefly when Kim opened this conversation, the issue is compounded by the fact that many residents are still recovering and were still recovering from prior disasters when Harvey hit. There were two floods in 2016, the Tax Day floods and the Memorial Day floods. And those losses combined, FEMA has reported and verified of nearly $16 million. So this was hit after hit after hit. What are some of the wins that this county can claim in terms of making some progress in recovery? There is a long-term recovery committee by the name of Fort Bend Recovers that has collaboratively worked to serve more than 1,500 residents, more than 500 households post-Harvey, with a range of needs, including temporary housing, financial assistance for basic needs, home repairs, and case management. In addition, the county has designated staff to interface with the Long-Term Recovery Committee. The public-private faith-based partnership model was put into place 1 year before Harvey hit, again in response to the two floods in 2016. So having these pre-existing trusting relationships enabled funders and other caregiving organizations to hit the ground running in response to Harvey. Of course, there are challenges. So one of the challenges is obviously the large number of cases still being managed, and the recovery hotline is still drawing in new cases. The group has noted that even 7 months post-Harvey, new clients are just now finding out about the services and resources available in the community, and some of them are reaching out for the first time because they have depleted their own resources upon which they were relying, but now are unable to use because they're depleted to fully recover. The Spiritual Behavioral Health Work Group, another group working in Fort Bend County on recovery, reported low uptake on available mental health services. So to counter this, they have delivered community-based events to draw in clients who may be in need of support, and will also now be pairing up a behavioral health specialist with a repair rebuild work group member to go out to homeowners during their repair assessment phase to make a personal connection as one way to destigmatize the offer for behavioral health services. So there's lots going on in Fort Bend County. I am going to move on now to Wharton County. Wharton County is much smaller than Fort Bend County. Its population is about 41 to 43,000 people. It has a reputation for agriculture, and it even has a legacy of slavery. One of the communities that I visited in Wharton was a very unique and interesting opportunity and a wonderful visit. And it was a community of African-American residents who had been neighbors, and their families had been neighbors for decades, for probably over 100 years. And they have refused to move in the face of two serious floods before Harvey. They are working hard with volunteers that come to their area to rebuild their community. Their resilience is amazing. Their spirit is amazing. They are still proud of where they live, and they are also very hopeful about a project, a levee project, planned for approximately 20 years that would prevent much of the flooding that Wharton experiences. In fact, Congress approved the estimated $7 million project in 2007, but never funded it. And Wharton has experienced now 3 floods since the approval. The delay, of course, means that costs for this project are increasing. So because it wasn't funded at the time does not mean that the project has to be refunded. And a bipartisan budget that was passed last week included funding for many Army Corps of Engineers projects. These projects always require a percentage of the cost be paid by the local entity, and in Wharton's case, a portion of the project has already been completed at a cost of $3 million. Two extensive ditch projects that have alleviated flooding in the north and east sides of Wharton. Consultants to the city of Wharton say that having part of the project already in place will put the completion of the levee project at the top of the list for completion. So fingers crossed, that's what we're hoping. The original levee concept has been modified from hard levee to a softer modification. And the city of Wharton is also contributing $3.5 million to sewer and drainage upgrades in the West End, which is the neighborhood I was just referring to, of Wharton. So what else can I tell you about those two communities? They have an amazing spirit. The churches have been amazing partners for funders, the United Way, the cities in both those counties, and they are very much at work on recovery. This is going to be, as everyone has said, and as won't surprise you, this is going to be long-term. One of the things that occurred at Philanthropy Southwest annual conference last fall, and we will be having our 70th conference in Galveston in November, come one, come all, November 1st to 3rd, was the fact that not just our Texas foundations, but all the foundations there said they needed help in making decisions about what to fund and where to fund in response to Harvey. So we heard what they asked for. They knew lots about what was going on in Houston, and Houston, of course, has amazing resources, still lots of work to do in Houston. But we decided to make it easier for our members by accessing our website for exactly the information they asked, including those nonprofit organizations that Houston funders may not have funded, but had some intelligence about and knew they were reputable organizations. So I'd like to turn it over now to Lauren Haskins, our Director of Communications, to tell you how this works.
Thanks, Lucille. And thank you to everyone who is very interested and engaged and invested in this recovery process for Hurricane Harvey. As Lucille said, we listened to our members who said, we really want to know who is funding what needs there are, and where there might be potential future opportunities for investment. So we worked on the back end of our website to create a database, and it's open to all funders, not just to our members, but so that funders can give information about who they're funding, who they've vetted but not yet funded. And the goal is to create a database where only funders can view current needs, current grantees that have been funded in the region, so they know where best to put their resources. So we invite all of you who are obviously engaged and interested in Hurricane Harvey relief and recovery efforts to access our database. The website is on the slide that should be up on your screen right now. You can access it, and then you can submit your own grant making data. You can see who else is funded in the area, and you can contact them, say, hey, I'm interested in this particular funding aspect. Did you have any interaction with regards to that specific issue, or just find out more about what other funders are doing in the region? And so we are just really wanting this to be a resource for all funders. The database is not accessible to grantees, so it's just a place for funders to talk to one another and see what one another are doing in the region.
One of the issues I also wanted to raise, and thank you, Lauren, for that, is the question that we hear. I'm sure you have heard it, and you live in places where there have been disasters as well. If people are continuing to suffer from great losses by remaining where they live, why don't they move? And that sounds like an easy solution. Of course, the tough questions are, where would they go and how would they get there? So my advice, my knee-jerk reaction to that often is, why don't you talk to the people that live in the affected areas and find out why they're reluctant to move, What is it that they cherish? What is it that we could help them rebuild to maintain what they consider the quality of life, and have a conversation. Certainly there are people, when Katrina hit, I know Houston took 100,000 folks from New Orleans immediately, and many of those never did return to Louisiana. They went to Arkansas, they went to other parts of Texas and other states in the general Southwest, but that was certainly their choice. I don't know if anybody on the line would like to react to that or add a comment to that, but we certainly have heard that a lot, especially in the Gulf Coast area, and both those counties, of course, are not far from Galveston, not far from the Gulf. So I invite anybody to ask a question or respond to that. We're here.
Thank you, Lucille and Lauren, especially for the way in which you dramatically gave us a picture of specific communities that have been heavily impacted by this storm, and also for the way in which you personalized the needs of persons who are recovering, but also our need to hear their voices in the community planning process. I'll now open the floor to questions. We have a few that have already come in. You both mentioned that Houston is an area where there are repeated disaster events, both those of us in other regions of the country hear about, and those that are known to your communities but that don't get much media attention. With one after another, with one funding cycle after another, trying to mitigate these events, how do you battle funder fatigue?
I think it's by telling the human stories. I myself have lived through 3 hurricanes, 2 in Houston and 1 in Brownsville on the coast. And I have to admit, I never thought about leaving where I lived to get away from the hurricanes. If you're talking about the coastal areas, I know that there are many other disasters that have happened since, fires and many other disasters in the United States that don't have to do with flooding. But, Houston is 50 feet above sea level. I mean, would you tell the whole city of Houston to move and go someplace else? I mean, it's certainly impractical. I think that with the knowledge that we have about building levees and what we've seen about how people come together, I think we need to work hard at finding ways to protect those people in those areas and spend more time doing that than complaining about the fact, well, here's another disaster, and by the way, this is another one by the water. I've given as much as I want to give, and of course that's everyone's choice. But when you've got history and you've got relationships that you cherish, and you consider where you live a safe place and a place with opportunity to your family, it's not so easy to pick up and move. Any comments you might have, Lauren? Or?
Yeah, I'll just say, we've listened to several seminars that go into the difference in what private dollars can do versus public dollars. And so one of the great things that we've witnessed as a convener of funders is seeing, an immigration funder who is looking at how they can, help immigrant communities in the face of Hurricane Harvey. Or we see mental health funders who say, okay, this is clearly an issue, the mental health aspects that coincide with a dramatic hurricane like this. How can we help with mental health issues? So we're seeing funders approach, in their issue of expertise, approach this holistically so that different communities are served appropriately. And so that's really been something that we've enjoyed, not only the collaboration among our members, but also them, just really offering their expertise in specific areas affected by the hurricane.
Thanks. You've mentioned 2 important roles for philanthropy in a disaster: as a convener and also as a storyteller, to keep the stories alive for the funding community. You've mentioned also, Lauren, particularly in that response, the importance of collaboration. Is that one of the primary values of a membership organization? What are other values that you think a membership organization adds to the work of disaster recovery?
Sure. I mean, I think, we talked about the database. So, it's not only collaboration, although I would say that's a huge component of what we're hoping, what value we're hoping to provide our members is the opportunity to connect and the opportunity to collaborate. But also it's to provide information. And so we create, whether it's a database like this or, other educational components, we are really focused on how can we educate our members and what they're interested in so that they can be the best grant makers possible. So there's many different ways that we do that, whether it be an educational program that convenes, Harvey funders in a room to talk about Harvey, or if it's doing a learning tour on immigration at the border for our immigration funders. We really believe that it's important to provide diverse educational programs that reflect the different funding issues that our members are prioritizing.
Thanks. I think this. Well, go ahead, Lucille.
Well, let's talk about collaboration again among funders. And Wharton and Fort Bend are collaborating, and they are planning a funders tour at the end of April, tentatively. And if you'd like more information, you feel free to contact the George Foundation or the Gulf Coast Medical Foundation in Wharton. George Foundation's in Fort Bend. In Richmond, Texas, or you can call Philanthropy Southwest to see what plans are for actually executing that. But they had their own collaborations within their counties, and now they're collaborating together. So it's it's been great to watch that happen, and they bring lots of rich resources and ideas, and and putting funds together makes sense.
Great. Leveraging funds, another important issue when the needs are as big as they are after Harvey.
Right.
Now, so you've mentioned your own site visits and also site visits that other organizations, you mentioned George Foundation, Gulf Coast, and then your own. Are there any other local contacts in Texas who might assist national funders in making site visits to impacted areas?
Well, any one of, Philanthropy Southwest is happy to do that. And my points of contact in those two counties that I've been describing, Wharton and Fort Bend County, have been the leaders in those counties on recovery efforts. And they have all the quote unquote intelligence on what's happening, what needs to happen, what is planned for the near future. So we're happy to provide you with their contact information or any of our funders in those two counties.
Great, thank you. And the final question that's come up today is this question of managing your regular activity alongside the demands of leadership in a disaster recovery. What do you recommend to funders who are attempting to address the needs of Texas while keeping their other funding priorities front and center? Lauren has already mentioned that, if they have particular expertise in a grant-making area, that they sometimes capitalize on that for their disaster funding. Are there any other tips you can provide?
Well, I think if there is a foundation outside of the Southwest or outside of Texas and looks at a disaster in Texas, I think that we always like to have people come to our area and see, on the ground what's going on. But there are so many wonderful networks among us. When I was just doing some reading and some web browsing over the weekend, looking at all the different reports that are available with respect to just this one disaster and which foundations have contributed to different aspects of it, and they're all over the United States. I don't think it would be difficult to connect with one of those or several of those and ask for advice, collaborate. Maybe even The community foundations, perfect example, Greater Houston Community Foundation. I mean, people from all over the country have been giving money there. Dallas Foundation here in Dallas also had a fund because the community foundations are so trusted for dispersing funds where they're most needed. So there are ways for funders outside of Texas and outside of Southwest to make a contribution financially, an investment by investing in those organizations that are already conveners in the area, like the community foundations, like the associations of grant makers.
Great.
Have I answered your question?
I think that's one answer. Absolutely. I think that helps folks to think about how to make strategic investments in organizations that are already on the ground, already familiar with the situation, clear about what the unmet needs are, and ready to do their own grant making.
Great. Okay.
Thank you so much to Lucille and also to Lauren. We're now going to turn to those of us who are with us today, and we believe that all of us will benefit from questions about the recovery and any reports of your own investments. If you have something to share, please click on the raise your hand icon and I'll announce you and share the microphone with you. And then if you'll give your name and the name of your foundation, and then be sure to unmute your microphone after I recognize you and wait just a second before you begin to speak. And if you prefer not to speak, but have something for the good of the group, you can type that into the question and answer function and I'll read that aloud. We have one attendee who is requesting a chance to speak. That's Regine Webster. I'm promoting her to panelist. Regine, we're ready for your report.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I've just unmuted you. We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, good. So just 4 updates over here. First is to say that as Lucille already said earlier, we've gone ahead and we've funded 8 long-term recovery groups so far. We've just added a second grant round that we're calling 1.5, where we've awarded 2 more grants. Total funds provided through our 9 grants totals $1.435 million. We're also continuing to do our updated sort of second round assessment of need based on data, site visits, and meetings with other funders, groups working on recovery, and then also, of course, those that are impacted. And what we're continuing to see really does support what's already been said on this call so far, is that it's housing, economic development, health and mental health, legal service needs, and those are really the areas that we're looking to narrow into for our second window of grant making. And then we hope to allocate an additional $3 to $4 million during our second official grant making round in mid-July. That's all for me from the Center for Disaster Philanthropy's Hurricane Harvey Recovery Fund.
Thanks, Regine. Any questions for Regine or any other reports from funders who are on the call or questions of funders? Well, in absence of any other questions, we'll go ahead and close for today. We hope this briefing has given you some ideas to implement your own funding strategies. And if there are philanthropic organizations you would believe would benefit from the briefings, please share the invitation to our next briefing, which will be on Monday, April 9th. John Cooper, who's the Assistant Vice President for Public Partnerships and Outreach at Texas A&M, will be leading us. He's a scholar whose work regularly informs our understandings of the effects of disasters on vulnerable populations and the urgent need for greater awareness of hazard reduction. And in addition to his work in Texas, he's a former program director at MDC in North Carolina, where he managed a FEMA emergency preparedness demonstration program to understand barriers to increased disaster awareness and preparedness in marginalized communities. We're really looking forward to having him with us. Thank you again to Lauren and Lucille for taking the time to share information with us, and to our friends who provided updates, and again to our partner, the Simmons Foundation, for their support of these briefings. As a final reminder, the written summary and recording of this briefing will be mounted at the Simmons Foundation website in their initiative area on Hurricane Harvey. You can go there to find links both to the Philanthropy Southwest database and to other things that were announced during our time together today. And if you have questions that were not addressed during today's briefing, feel free to email them to me at my email, which is there on your screen, kim.maphisearly@disasterphilanthropy.org. Have a good afternoon. Tell your philanthropic colleagues about the archive and the next briefing, and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks. Thanks so much.